This great land of ours, the United States, is heading for the most predictable economic crisis in our history. That's the dire warning from the head of the Congressional Budget Committee, Congressman Paul Ryan. He's trying to prevent that crisis from happening.
The congressman has a plan to bring the federal deficit under control. David Brody talked to Ryan about his plan and America's future.
Paul Ryan looks like just a regular guy, but make no mistake, this congressman from Wisconsin doubles as the House Budget Chairman and is the man on the Republican front lines when it comes to solving America's debt crisis.
We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar our government spends today. We already know our children are going to have a diminished future if we stay on the current path.
Ryan is consumed by numbers. He lives and breathes them, and he's come up with a budget that takes serious steps to rein in a $16 trillion national debt, and it's growing by the day. He's been preaching about this impending disaster for years.
Let me ask you a question. What if your president, your senator, your congressman knew it was coming?
His plan wouldn't cut defense spending, but everything else in the budget would be trimmed by roughly 20%. While his budget passed the Republican House, it's dead on arrival in the Senate because Democrats say it would take away benefits from low-income Americans.
The liberals will say that about 60% of the budget cuts that you're proposing are going to hit low-income Americans. What's the response?
Well, I would say, first of all, we need to fix our social safety net. And spending still continues under our budget on Medicaid and these other programs. They just don't grow at the crazy pace that the president's proposing because those become unsustainable.
Ryan wants to partially privatize Medicare to save the system, but liberal groups say that will hurt seniors. So they have run campaign ads showing Republicans throwing grandma off a cliff.
I thought you'd be late to this interview because you'd be busy throwing Granny off the cliff. But you showed up on time. I mean, what is the deal with the stereotypes that are out there? I mean, you haven't thrown Granny off the cliff anytime recently, have you?
No, we're used to this from the president. Unfortunately, the president doesn't like to offer solutions. He likes to offer attacks. He likes to distort and demagogue, and it's really beneath him, I think.
President Obama's budget plan didn't receive one single Republican or Democratic vote in the House. So instead, the president has taken direct aim at Ryan's plan, calling it social Darwinism. Then he trots out the impending doom scenario.
If this budget becomes law and the cuts were applied evenly, starting in 2014, over 200,000 children would lose their chance to get an early education in the Head Start program. 2 million mothers and young children would be cut from a program that gives them access to healthy food.
This is where faith comes into the equation. Liberal churches generally see the government as a vital way to help people in need. But Paul Ryan's Catholic faith teaches him that less government is the way to go.
To me, the principle of subsidiarity, which is really federalism, meaning government closest to the people governs best. Having a civil society of the principle of solidarity where we, through our civic organizations, through our churches, through our charities, through all of our different groups where we interact with people as a community, that's how we advance the common good, by not having big government crowd out civil society, but by having enough space in our communities so that we can interact with each other and take care of people who are down and out in our communities.
Ultimately, the real question is, will anything ever really change in Washington? The debt is huge, but so is the political risk when taking tough votes to rein in spending.
The political will by these politicians, I mean, do they have the political will to get some of the serious deficit reduction done?
Look, what we're experiencing in America, in Wisconsin, are decades of politicians making lots of empty promises to voters. And those empty promises are going to quickly become broken promises if we have a debt crisis. What we believe we owe the country is the truth. We're at a very precarious moment in America. Do we want the American idea, that opportunity society with a safety net? Or do we want this cradle-to-grave welfare state, this sort of European social democracy in a debt crisis, a nation in debt, doubt, and decline?
David Brody, CBN News, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
A great man, Paul Ryan. He's speaking truth. He's courageous enough to tell people the way it is. And for some reason, the Democrats in the Senate will not acknowledge the facts. You cannot sustain yourself by borrowing 40 cents on every dollar you spend. You cannot sustain it. Any household that would borrow 40% of their living costs would soon be in bankruptcy, and there would be no hope for them. But here we have a great country that has the ability to print money. Well, We can't print it but so long before people say this stuff is worthless papers and we're not going to take it anymore. Look what's happening to Greece. Look what's going to be happening to Portugal and what's going to be happening to Italy and Spain and these other countries. All these social programs that seem so nice are suddenly going to collapse, and people won't have jobs. They'll be out on the street. Families will be torn apart. Education will not be working. Police won't be on their job because they'll be on strike looking for more money. And what the president had to say was pure and utter demagoguery. It was bitter, nasty, and full of falsehoods. And it's just appalling that the leader of the free world would stoop that low instead of coming up with a solution. He proposed the budget. The president proposed the budget, went to the Congress, didn't get a single vote, neither from his party or from the other party. Not a vote for that thing because the congressman recognized it was a joke. Well, you can get the latest on politics in the presidential race by checking out the Brody File on CBNNews.com. Lee Webb has the rest of our top stories from the CBN newsroom. Lee.
Pat, Mitt Romney says he won't rule out Rick Santorum as a running mate. In fact, he says he won't rule out anyone at this point. Romney says he doesn't have a list of possible vice presidential candidates at this point, but he adds that he would certainly consider the people he had the privilege of running against. He says the first criterion is whether or not the person could be the president, if necessary. Several earthquakes struck within minutes of each other in Oregon, California, and Mexico last night. A magnitude 7 quake struck an area in the mountains of western Mexico. It caused tall buildings to sway more than 200 miles away in Mexico City, but there was no major damage. 2 other quakes struck off the coast of Oregon and California. Analysts say there's no evidence the quakes were connected. They were produced by unrelated tectonic plates. They came on the same day, though, of 2 massive quakes striking near Indonesia, measuring 8.6 and 8.2. Tsunami watchers were issued, but later lifted. That was good news that they did not have a tsunami over there, Pat.
It is good news, but once again, the Pacific plate is bumping up against the North American plate. The North American plate is moving somewhat westward. The Pacific plate is moving somewhat northward, and they begin to intersect. And then you look around the so-called Ring of Fire, and they are all connected. This world we live in, these plates do work with one another. And if they have a major earthquake over the Aceh area in Indonesia and Sumatra, we'll be having things in Alaska and on the coast of South America. But it looks like an unusual period of seismic activity. Well, the Greens don't like coal. They've done everything they can to cut the coal industry in America, but there is bright news for those in West Virginia and others that mine the coal. Lee.
Related to that, U.S. exports of coal hit their highest levels in 2 decades last year. Demand for coal is strong in other countries, but it's falling here in the U.S. Coal faces competition from natural gas and expensive new government regulations for coal-fired power plants. That means companies are looking for new customers internationally, and many of them are in Asia, which is growing quickly and needs new energy sources. Prosecutors face tough legal hurdles in their second-degree murder case against George Zimmerman. They will have to prove that Zimmerman intentionally went after 17-year-old Trayvon Martin instead of killing him in self-defense, and they will have to refute arguments that he had the right under a Florida law to use deadly force. Zimmerman's new attorney says his client is concerned about getting a fair trial.
There's obviously been a lot of information flowing. I think a lot of it's been both premature and maybe inappropriate.
But the prosecutor in the case says she's just looking for justice.
It is the search for justice for Trayvon that has brought us to this moment. The first thing we did was pray with them. We opened our meeting in prayer.
Tensions have been rising in the area where the killing happened in Sanford, Florida, but Martin's family has asked for calm. Nearly 1 in 4 babies is born to unmarried couples who are living together. The Centers for Disease Control interviewed more than 22,000 men and women. About 23% of the reported births were to unmarried heterosexual couples who were living together when their child was born. That's up from 14% in 2002. Pat?
Folks, like it or not, our government has made it tough to be married. There's a so-called marriage penalty in the tax law. They've tried to eliminate it, but it looks like it's coming back. There are strictures against marriage, and there are all kinds of incentives not to get married. And so young couples say, why bother? Why go through all those formalities when all we can do is just shack up? We can live together, and we can have babies and so forth. But that's not the kind of stable society we want. Young children need a mother and a father, and they need a stable environment. And so much of the abuse that takes place, especially sexual abuse against young children, takes place from live-in boyfriends that don't really have a love and compassion and care for the children. So this is not a healthy trend for this great nation. We've got a lot of other pathologies that we should be worried about, but this is certainly one of them. The family is the foundational building block of our society. And if it is corroded, and it looks like there's an effort by the so-called liberals and progressives to tear it apart, if that happens, heaven help the next generation. Lee?
Lack of sleep could increase your risk of obesity and diabetes. A new study finds irregular sleep patterns can slow down your metabolism, and that could contribute to weight gain. Researchers at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston also found disrupted sleep raises blood sugar levels, which could lead to diabetes. Chronic sleep problems are common in the U.S. Government research has found that up to 40% of adult Americans do not get enough sleep. A lack of sleep has also been associated with heart attacks and stroke. Pat, back to you.
Thank you. You know, if you fast, there's a rise of what's called leptin, which cuts down your appetite, and leptin is the thing that you need to, curb the eating. On the other hand, when you lose sleep, there's something called ghrelin, and it's a hormone that says you are hungry, you've got to feed yourself. And so lack of sleep makes hunger, and hunger means more eating, which means more obesity.
Wow.
Did you know that?
I did not know that, but there's a lot being...
You watch the 700 Club, you learn things.
I know. I need to tune in more regularly.
Really, I want you to do that. All right, go ahead. All right.
The Arizona legislature has passed a bill banning late-term abortions. The measure prevents women from having the procedure after 20 weeks of pregnancy, except for medical emergencies. The bill also requires the state to maintain a website describing fetuses at different stages of development and presenting women with alternatives to abortion. The measure passed Arizona's House in a vote of 37 to 22. It now heads to Republican Governor Jan Brewer for her signature. A Eureka, California Planned Parenthood chapter launches a prayer campaign in support of abortion. They're calling it, amazingly enough, 40 Days of Prayer, supporting women everywhere. Organizers say the event is, quote, in celebration of women and reproductive rights. Others, though, are speaking out against the campaign. The Liberty Council says Planned Parenthood's prayer campaign is offensive. As much as they might not like the comparison, Planned Parenthood today is no different than the eugenics promoted by its founder, Margaret Sanger, who advocated the elimination of so-called undesirables, just like the most famous eugenicist, Adolf Hitler. The campaign lists 40 different prayers for those involved in an abortion, the mothers, their escorts, and the doctor performing the abortion. It doesn't, however, include a prayer for the unborn baby. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.